The skydiving thing is kind of an example of I'd rather be doing something crazy and fun physically than sitting down and reading a book. And that's where I was. And then once I hit this new marker in my life, the benefits of reading just became so apparent. And they were
Yes.
so big in my eyes. I went, wow, I'm really a little disappointed that I hadn't started this earlier.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited about my guest today. His name is Tony Galloway. He's a good friend of mine, and you are really going to enjoy his literacy journey. So, thank you for joining me, Tony.
You're welcome. It's a privilege to be interviewed by you.
Well, Tony, I want to talk to you because you told me that you were a reluctant reader for most of your life,
Yeah.
but something changed, and now you're an avid reader. So I wonder if you could tell me about that transition, that journey. What happened?
Yeah, so the word avid is probably relative. Not a person who lays in bed reading novels at night.
Okay.
However, I do have at least one book that I'm reading all the time, which is crazy because when I was a kid, I remember reading like Hardy Boys books, a few of them.
The
My
Mhm.
dad got me into that. And, that was 11, 12 years old. And then riding bikes and playing outside took over, and books were in the rearview mirror.
Sure.
And as I became, well, through teenage years and young adult years, I was focused on other things in life, and I'm a very active person.
Hmm.
And I was, chasing adrenaline and chasing money and chasing a bunch of things, for some reason in my mindset, sitting down and cracking a book open was a tremendous waste of time.
Hmm.
And I just saw no benefit in it. I thought it was, I don't know if I would put the words to it, but it was like lazy people sit around and read books. You know what I mean? And that was kind of the mentality that was back there, but I wasn't verbalizing it, and I don't think I was really in touch with it. But I think that's how I understood people who just read all the time. I'm like, don't you have anything better to do?
You needed a
So
paradigm shift. Come on now.
100%. Yeah. And the older I got, and obviously the more I started reading, the more I realized that even a lot of the things that I was pursuing, so
Hmm.
that seems to be kind of a pivot point for people in a lot of paradigm shifts and just ways that they view life. You're reevaluating,
Yeah.
you're trying to view how successful am I based on where I thought I would be at this age. So all those
Hmm.
things are going through your mind. And somebody handed me a book just kind of randomly and just said, "Hey, I got this book and I think you might like it." And I'm going to circle back to a point of this, but as the person was handing me the book, I'm like, "Well, what was your favorite part?" And they said, "Oh, I haven't read it yet. It's just I tried to read it and it just wasn't time for me." And I
Hmm.
thought, "Well, that's weird. Why would you recommend a book you haven't read?"
Okay.
So I'll circle back to that in a little bit. But I read the book and it was just like life to me. It was speaking things that I had been thinking about, and it was so poignant and so crucial, like right at that moment in my life. It was amazing how powerful it hit me. And that was good. And I don't think it was by accident. I think, God wanted to get a hook in my mouth. And so from there, I just started to have a different perspective about books. And then coincidentally, another person said, "Oh man, I got this book you're going to love." And you've probably experienced, if you've been reading your whole life, that if you're talking to people about a book that you read, then there's conversations like, "Oh, well, I just finished this book," or "So and so just finished this one. You'll probably like this one." So the recommendations start popping off as you start kind of walking down that path.
Mm.
So then I just started getting recommendations, and then I started having, now that I had become a reader, because I think I read four books in the first 3 months of my 50th year, which I hadn't read
Mm.
that many books as an adult since since I was 18 or 21.
Hmm.
So, and finishing a book cover to cover was a weird feeling. Just, hitting that last page and then you just close it and you're like,
Oh, you did that, huh? Cover to cover.
yeah, there was a whole feeling of accomplishment, and then there was also that feeling of like when you finish a good movie and you wish it
Hmm.
wasn't over,
Yes.
and you're kind of going, "Ah, what am I going to do now?" And then, you can easily become that person who's just, I need another book.
I'm thinking about the different professions you've been in, and you're, like you said, you're an active person. You said dive in. It's not that you couldn't read, but didn't you have to read manuals on skydiving and construction? And it
Yeah, it
wasn't
was funny.
read,
I
but
I was talking to my wife, Heather, about the fact that you had asked me to do this interview, and I'm like, I have no idea why she asked me because I just started reading 6 years ago. And I said it'll probably be a short interview. Um, but I said I'm an expert reader at menus and street signs. But other than that, no, I do read instructions and manuals, and it's I think I've always been a person who was fascinated with wordsmithing. I've got an uncle that is just an amazing wordsmith, and
yes.
so just kind of growing up next to him, even though I wasn't a reader, I was very intent on expanding my vocabulary and adopting new words and practicing them. And
I think I might know who you're talking about. This man has a very huge vocabulary.
yes.
I,
And I knew I could tell he was a wordsmith at one point
yes.
because he was reading a letter to me. I just happened to be at his house. He's my uncle. I
Hmm.
just happened to be at his house and he was showing me this letter that he was writing to somebody, and it was a chastisement. But when you read it, it felt somewhat encouraging. And I just thought he ripped that person to shreds, and they probably don't even know that's what just happened.
It's
Just
because
be
of his vocabulary.
yes, and the way he worded things and the perspective that he brought, and those were moments as I began to step into adulthood where I thought that's a invaluable art and skill set to have. And I would imagine you don't get that by not including reading into that, just pouring that stuff into your mind and who you are. So yeah, I mean, I've been I've been self-employed probably more than I've been employed in my life as an adult. And so I've had to try to understand some tax issues and employee issues and licensing and instructions on building and blueprinting and
Skydiving.
skydiving is another thing where that challenged me because and I hadn't become a reader at that point because I started skydiving in 92. One of my most recent instructional ratings that I got was definitely the toughest, and I just got it 3 years ago. But
Mhm.
it was a week-long course where I was on site at the drop zone, and we would get up in the morning at 7 o'clock. We'd be outside doing practicals and jumping out of the planes and practicing those things. And then we would do some classroom stuff from like noon to 5. And then I would go back to the camper that I was staying in and I would study and read and cross-reference books and go online and find resources. And I would do that until midnight. And,
Hmm.
and I did that for a week. So it's not like I didn't know how to read.
No, no.
But I
Hmm.
can definitely tell as I began to read more frequently, you can feel the fluidity change of how fast you can read and how far your eyes are going ahead and those types of things. But yeah, the skydiving thing is kind of an example of I'd rather be doing something crazy and fun physically than sitting down and reading a book. And that's where I was. And then once I hit this new marker in my life, the benefits of reading just became so apparent and they were
Yes.
so big in my eyes. I went, wow, I'm really a little disappointed that I hadn't started this earlier.
But here's what I
And
noticed about you, Tony. You're talking about the benefits of reading. So
yeah,
you didn't keep that to yourself because one time you told me you had a construction crew and you all got together to read a book that I think you chose because you wanted them to experience the benefits of reading. Why did you do that? You wanted your construction crew.
well, I wasn't the one who picked the book and made the decision.
Okay.
Um, I was one of the kind of lead guys in that conversation.
Hmm.
And I think the goal for that was probably dual purposed to get guys to read.
Mm.
It, in that particular situation, it was more about the content.
Yes.
And we
Mhm.
wanted everybody to evaluate how they were running their business based on the model. It was the guy who wrote the book man, I can't remember his name now, but he's the guy who owns Worldwide Technologies. One, they're close by, one of their
Yes.
headquarters, and the guy's a Christian. He happens to
Mm-hmm.
be a black guy that was born and raised in a town where I was skydiving a lot.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there were some connections there, and but he wrote a fantastic book about doing business by the book, and it was based on biblical principles
Yes.
and
Yes.
how he started his business and grew it. And I started to just realize this immense benefit of wasting time with a book open in front of you. And it just changed everything because it enriches your conversations, it enriches your view of life. It gives you commonalities in conversations.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many benefits to reading. And also there's a benefit of just sitting still,
Yes.
not moving.
Yes.
That's a benefit. And
Yes.
people are so distracted with short attention spans on their phones or on, sitcoms. You got 20 minutes worth of content in between commercials, maybe if you're still watching commercials,
Yes.
and then you can just sit there and dive into a book, and it doesn't stop until you stop. It's a
It's
lengthy amount of time where you're capturing all of your distractions, and you're focusing in. And I think that's there are a lot of aspects of that are good for our character that
right.
we miss out on if we're just running and doing. And
All right, and just slow down and just read a book. Now, here's one other thing before we wrap up, but I love how you're sharing this reading experience with your wife, Heather, that you and Heather read together. Can you describe that? What's that like?
yeah, so there have been a couple of books that we've read. There was one that was about marriage, one that was thinking of the ones that we read in the way that you're describing, and it was Fierce Marriage, Unoffendable, and then most recently Imagine Heaven.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's books that we're both interested in reading, and since we just had one copy, we would take turns reading a chapter to each other. So
Mm.
that was a fun time, as a couple to be able to, and we still are doing that with the one book that we're on right now together. So that's fun. It's a relationship builder. And I do want to circle back really quickly because I don't want to
Sure.
forget this. But you remember when I said somebody gave me a book that they hadn't read? I just thought, how can you even do that? Because I hadn't been a reader. How does that happen? And then I realized that after reading a number of books, that you can pick up a book even though the topic is good. It just might not be where your brain is at that moment. But
Sure.
but now I know what it means to be able to circle back around and pick one up, and now it's alive to you.
Hmm. And that's
So
what your friend said to you when he said, "Well, you know what? It's for you, but it's not my time."
yeah. And he
Yeah.
was looking forward to the moment where it would be ready for him, or he'd be ready for the book.
Mm-hmm.
But I just didn't understand that until I had read a few books, and then I had started to read at least two of them, two books, and it was just wasn't hitting, and I just thought, I don't know. But instead of just saying, well, this isn't a good book,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that then you understand through the process that you go, it's not that it's a bad book, I just may not be ready for it yet,
Right.
which was a new thought for me. So it was kind of interesting to see what that was as I became a reader. And then I understood how he could recommend a book that he hadn't read yet.
Oh, that's great. I always ask my guests this question. Why do you think literacy, reading, writing, why do you think that's important? And what would your world be like if you couldn't do it?
I mean, at this point, I feel like it would be losing one of your senses.
Wow.
So
Mm.
yeah, I mean, you can function without it, as I did for the first 50 years of my life, basically.
Mhm.
But it kind of reminds me of when you see people who get cochlear implants,
Yes.
and these kids that hear their mom's voice for the first time, or even the people who get, I think they have glasses now that can correct color blindness.
Yes.
And you see when they put those on, and there's just like this, whoa. So I feel like there would be a dullness, definitely. I can't even imagine what it would be like. But if you were completely illiterate and you were just walking through the world trying to navigate get places, understand what's going on around you, being able to read into situations, read in, I don't know how to say that. But I feel like you would just, yeah, you would be just missing a complete sense. And then also just the richness. Like if you couldn't smell and you're in a room where fresh bread is being baked,
Yes.
and if you can smell, it's just like, oh,
Mhm.
this is wonderful. And if you aren't reading, you're missing out on that inhalation of something savory and amazing.
So you're a big advocate now.
Yes, I am.
I just really thank you for giving me your perspective, but I think you're like your uncle, a wordsmith.
That's a huge compliment. Thank you.
I've noticed you always have an apt word for things, and
And that's something that you can enjoy pursuing forever. You never conquer that.
well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your
You're
little
welcome.
journey.
You're
And
welcome.
see you
Thanks
next.
for asking me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Tony.
All right. See ya.
Bye.